Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast, the day after depending on your opinion, either maybe semi-interesting, probably disastrous night for the New York Knicks after the 2022 NBA draft. I went solo last night. You might have caught it, giving my immediate reaction, but now I'm joined by, guess who? Alex Wolfe. He's back to give his thoughts. Alex, what are we going to get into?
Well, I'm certainly not going to be sunshine and roses today. I know I normally am, but I'm not particularly happy, and I'll get into why, and then we'll just kind of talk it out. The Knicks trade out of the first round and get some future protected picks for their trouble. So we'll get into that next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. We want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms, including on YouTube. I am Gavin, Schall, a play-by-play broadcaster. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the greatest Knicks website out there, The Strickland. And this is Locked On Knicks, the day after the Knicks did not make the 11th pick in the draft. So I'll before throwing it to you for your thoughts, Alex, because I gave mine in depth last night, I just want to quickly recap what happened exactly with the New York Knicks last night. In order, they traded the 11th pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They got back 3 firsts from the Thunder, including a 2023 pick from Denver, and then picks that start in 2023 from Detroit and Washington. Then they traded the Denver 2023 third and 4 second-round picks to Charlotte for the 13th pick in the draft. Then they turned around and traded that 13th pick and Kemba Walker to Detroit for Milwaukee's 2025 first-round pick. The protections on each of those picks, the Pistons pick is protected 1 through 18 in 2023 and 2024, 1 through 13 in 2025, 1 through 11 in 2026, 1 through 9 in 2027. The Washington pick is protected 1 through 14 next year, 1 through 12 in 2024, 1 through 10 in 2025, 1 through 8 in 2026. And the Milwaukee pick will convey in 2025, presumably, because it is protected 1 through 4. So, Alex, I can see that you're excited after hearing about that trade. Now, seriously, how do you feel about all that? Because last night, I don't know, it was almost like too much to process in one night. And at least in my mind, it's kind of like, all right, you make this deal, you better have something in mind that you're going to do with those picks immediately. If not, it doesn't really make any sense to me. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, first off, they overpaid to get off of Kemba Walker's salary, which was just stupid move number one. Like, it's sort of like, trying to buy a house. Like, if we're looking at Jalen Brunson as trying to buy a house, right? And you're trying to buy a house, if you can't afford it and you're going to be house poor, then maybe you shouldn't be buying the house. And like, if you can't eat a $2.5 million hit or whatever on Kemba Walker from stretching him, and instead have to give up 4 second-round picks to get off that, that's bad asset management. And maybe you just shouldn't be spending on a Jalen Brunson, who's probably not going to, like, all I kept seeing last night as I was arguing with people on Twitter on one bar of service while I'm away for a friend's wedding was like, clearly they didn't see a needle mover. And I'm like, okay, do you think Brunson's moving the needle that much that you're willing to give up all these assets to clear this space for him? I don't buy it. And I like Brunson. Like, I think Brunson is a great player. I think he really showed something in this playoffs, but why are the Knicks giving up all these assets just to create the space for him? You know, and I understand the second round picks are like, you know, sometimes get thrown around like candy, but we lauded the Knicks for accumulating those over time. And you would hope that they would be used for something a little more than just like, hey, let's get off this extremely low risk deal last year that we probably should have never put a guaranteed second, year on to begin with, but we did. But let's use these assets that we've now accumulated just to get off of our garbage. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's self-created problems here. And so that's the first part of it that annoys me. The second part is, I think that based off the protections that are on those picks, and I can understand if some people think otherwise, but I think based off the protections on those picks, they're more or less fake first-round picks. Like, if you have picks that have zero chance of landing in the lottery, or at best could land potentially where the Knicks landed in yesterday's draft, that's not going to be a huge needle mover in this like star trade that you're looking for down the line. Utah is not going to be like, oh boy, we're looking to blow up our whole franchise and, trade Donovan Mitchell. We can't wait to add a bunch of guys at pick 17, in like 2 years time. And like, no, nobody is looking at that and saying, oh, wow, what a great asset. Like, this is a great pick to use. And then I had people, again, using online last night, like, oh, well, that a pick with even harsher protections just got the Knicks Cam Reddish. Sweet. I mean, I wasn't sold on Cam Reddish. He was a flyer. I mean, Cam Reddish is not a superstar or something, and maybe some people still think that. I've never thought that. He's always been a huge question mark. So, yeah, cool. You got to take a stab at a guy that was taken top 10, but like that, that's a far cry from using a pick like that to get anyone of actual established NBA significance. And I don't think that those picks carry a lot of weight in those applications. And that's what annoys me with this whole thing is I just like, you had 2 players at minimum available there that I think were worth potentially investing in either Jalen Duren or AJ Griffin. You had other guys that, I mean, even Ousmane Dieng, who went with the pick from the Knicks and then got traded to OKC as part of that big deal, I thought was potentially like worth taking there and betting on your development staff. Take this like 6'10", skilled ball of clay, put some meat on his bones and hope that it works out. I mean, why not? What do you have to lose, right? And even like Jalen Williams or something like that, get a guy who's like super lengthy, is a very Tibbsy sort of player, and go with him. I don't understand the thought process. I understand the thought process, let's put it that way, but I strongly disagree with it. And to your point, unless they have something cooked up to follow this, or they think that they have an actual legitimate shot at like Donovan Mitchell within the next year or something like that, and Utah's actually going to look at this like quote unquote treasure trove of picks and be like, oh wow, this is very compelling, we definitely want those picks as part of a Donovan Mitchell trade, then maybe I'll eat my words at that point. But even then, it's like, well, what are you still going to have to give up on the player front and on your own picks front? Because these picks alone are not going to get any sort of star trade done. They're going to essentially be sweeteners. So you just traded a lottery pick for a bunch of sweeteners. And it gets under my skin a bit. I don't like it. And I feel like this is just kind of adding to this trend that the Knicks for the last 3 years now, I love the guys that they have picked when they have made picks. But like for the last 3 years now, their strategy has essentially just been, let's keep like kicking the can down the road and kicking the can down the road and kicking the can down the road. And they did that, back in the first draft that they had by, moving up their first round pick and their second round pick and then trading out of that second round pick. They did it last year by having 2 picks at 19 and 21 and then ultimately trading back and only ending up with a pick at 25 to then use that other pick that they received to trade for Cam Reddish. And so it's just, I'm like, at a certain point, kicking the can down the road doesn't work anymore. And like, if all those picks say convey by next year or something, the Knicks are going to be in the same situation where they're going to be selling them off for pennies on the dollar because they're going to be saying, oh, we have too many picks and we can't roster 3 more rookies. So let's just trade this for another, like, what'll it be next time? A top 22 protected first round pick that they're going to get back? Like I don't know. I don't like this strategy of not taking a chance and trusting your scouting, especially when you have a guy in Walt Perrin that has done such a good job. Maybe I would eat my words if I could talk to Walt Perrin and he told me with truth serum that there was not a single guy he thought was worth the pick at 11 yesterday. But in all likelihood, I don't think that's the case.
I agree with a lot of what you said, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. But first, Alex, I got to say, boom, shakalaka. We have big news. The one and only NBA Jam is back. Arcade went up. The leader in home retro arcade games is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399. So check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. You can enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade1up.com. betOnline.net.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win an NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with?
And today's show is also brought to you by betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Pretty soon, I'm sure there'll be some new NBA futures coming out with the draft having been completed. I'm sure we'll have some free agent props to bet on soon enough. Maybe betting on Jalen Brunson to the Knicks would not be the worst idea. But also, if you're a Mets fan, Mets plus 1.5 runs against the Marlins. I mean, it's the Marlins we're talking about here. Taijuan Walker's on the mound. I think they should be okay. I would bet the Mets plus 1.5 versus the Marlins today. But if you want to check out some odds and place some bets for yourself, head to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Gavin, I ranted and raved enough in that first segment, did a little bit of a monologue. Apologies there. What's your reaction to all that? Like, I haven't gotten a chance to watch your show from last night, so I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the overall state of things after these trades went down.
Dude, I sent it to you like 3 a.m. What are you doing? I thought you would have woken up for that. No, that's fair. Part of my reaction is I wish they had just unless I'm completely off on the order of operations here, and feel free to correct me if I am. I wish they just stopped in the middle, right? Because they could have traded essentially from 11 to 13 and gotten those 2 first-round picks from the Thunder, and then just cut it off there, and still
not done the Kemba part,
right? Yeah. And ended up with one of Jalen Duren or AJ Griffin, and that would have to me looked like a stroke of genius, considering that I think those were the guys that they probably would have wanted at 11 anyways. And the Jalen Duren part of this is the one that pains me, and Look, I kind of hate to do this about specific prospects because last year we were on here and we were like complaining and moaning that they didn't find a way to get Sharif Cooper. And it turned out like, oh, who knows? Maybe Sharif Cooper grows into an NBA All-Star eventually. But after 1 year, that looks like, all right, that was kind of ridiculous. They're much better off trading back and getting Quentin Grimes. And maybe we'll look back a year from now. And obviously these two aren't mutually exclusive. Trevor Keel's better than anyone that they could have gotten at 16, right? Or whoever they trade those picks for. Wow, so much. They figured out a way to get Donovan Mitchell. Insane that we were complaining Griffin, who's averaging 2 points per game on the Hawks right now, right? So time will give us some more perspective on this. And if I've learned anything from the last 2 years of Knicks draft, it's to place maybe a little bit of faith in this front office and give it some air, because we were mad the last 2 years, right? Emmanuel Quickly, I was like, who is this guy? He doesn't seem like an NBA player to me. Obi Toppin, I was like, hey, why did they take him over this guy? Some of those were right. A lot of those are wrong. Obi Toppin's a nice player. Quentin Grimes turned out to be a really good pick, even if the asset management that got us there wasn't completely perfect. But to me, Jalen Duren seemed like such a good bet. And to me, what this tells us is, one, all of this tells us they definitely think they're getting Jalen Brunson. If not, this was really insane. 2, they're set on re-signing Mitchell Robinson. And look, we love Mitch. We spent the first few months of this podcast calling it Locked On Mitch. That being said, to me, Duren represents a guy whose worst case scenario is a lot of what Mitch is now, right? Maybe not quite the highs in terms of being the best rim finisher of all time and one of the best offensive rebounders in the league, but 95% of that. And the ceiling or even the mid-tier outcome for Jalen Duren, I think, is a player at the center position who's a lot more intriguing, with some flashes of an ability to facilitate, maybe a little bit of a mid-range jumper, and defensively way more flexibility than Mitchell Robinson to jump out on the perimeter and switch and guard guys. And in the playoffs, we keep talking about this in regards to Robinson. I had 20 minutes on this with Jake Rosen. That's what you need. You need that type of center in the modern NBA. And the fact that you're paying him, like a third of what Mitchell Robinson is going to be making, a fourth of what Mitchell Robinson is going to be making, that's probably closer to the truth, on an annual basis, it makes so much sense to me to take that swing on Jalen Duren. And I feel like the reason the Knicks didn't want to do that is because they have this false I was gonna say false flag. That's the wrong term. But they have this false incentive like kind of like dangling in front of them, like, oh, you got to make the playoffs, you got to be competitive, or Dolan's gonna turn on you and fire you. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the same thinking that has driven the Knicks' ineptitude for the past 2+ decades, right? That's how we've gotten here. And the whole premise of this front office was that it was supposed to be different. And in a lot of ways, it is different. In a lot of ways, what they did with Kemba Walker last night, I think, was indicative of what this whole free agency is going to be. And that's betting on the youth. And if that's the case, that is absolutely fantastic. But to me, going for a Jalen Duren over re-signing Mitchell Robinson, and yes, it sucks that you didn't get an asset for Mitchell Robinson at the trade deadline, but if it had worked out that way, I'm coming out of this draft with Jalen Duren and 2 extra first-round picks. Duren, a guy that a lot of people who are very, very smart considered a top 5 prospect in this draft. I'm ecstatic with that outcome. I'm really, really content. I'm saying you're betting on the youth, and you're having a center who just on both ends of the floor, I think gives you more flexibility than what Mitch is at this point, because we know what Mitch is, and it's a nice player, and it's a guy with some very defined strengths. But I think if you want to win deep in the playoffs, I could be proven wrong on this. I don't think he's the center to get you there. I think Duren theoretically could be. So that would have been interesting. AJ Griffin, literally like one of the best 18-year-old shooters to ever come through college basketball, recovering from 2 knee injuries in high school, a guy who's 6'6" with like a 7'1" wingspan and who had nuclear athleticism. That's someone I want to take a bet on. Again, totally plausible. Neither of those guys work out, and the Knicks are justified, or they turn these picks into a star. And again, in that scenario, this is justified, but they have to have such a good plan in place. And in my mind, they got these picks for, you know what, if we trade for Brunson and Brunson turns out well, we can package Brunson, one of Obi, IQ, and Grimes, and 5 or 6 first-round picks and turn that into a star. And maybe they're right, but there are still teams with better assets than the Knicks. The Thunder still have twice as many first-round picks as the Knicks do over the next couple of drafts, and better young players to trade. The Knicks are not number 1 on the star trade list at this moment. And because of that, I sit here and I'm thinking, who is this dude? I went through every team in the NBA last night. I can't identify the person that these picks are for. And if they're just picks, then to your point, that sucks, because I would rather take a swing on one of those 2 guys I just mentioned than have these nebulous picks that could be something, maybe nothing over the next couple of years. And especially, Alex, I went over the protections. Given that the teams are the Wizards and the Pistons, they're unlikely to convey next year. If they were sure thing picks next year in that 2023 draft, I would be really, really intrigued. Our guy Jonathan Wasserman tweeted out, I think 2 weeks ago at this point, or a week ago at this point, saying a lot of teams are going to try to acquire picks for 2023 because they are more valuable currency than mid-first round picks in 2022. Next year's draft is just put in that type of airs. So if those picks were sure things for next year, I would be completely on board with this, but they're not. And especially considering that they had the 2023 first-round picks, and they could have had AJ Griffin or Jalen Duren. So that's where I'm at after a night of sleeping on it.
Yeah, honestly, that I've been looking at it all as one giant move, because it seemed like that's how the Knicks were sort of doing it. But had they had the option to just cut bait halfway through, like you said, and just be like, all right, let's leave this whole like Kemba portion out of this. You know, we're just gonna and you know, giving up the large amount of second round picks, and you know, getting that Milwaukee first back while also trading away 13. Like, yeah, that's way more palatable to me. You know, I think that would have been fine. You know, move back 2 spots if they felt good about Duren or AJ. Take him. You know, they're so heavily linked to AJ Griffin. It really perplexed me a bit that things didn't work out there. You know, whatever. But to your point with Duren too, like, how functionally different is Jalen Duren from like James Wiseman, who went, out of Memphis as the number 2 overall pick just like 2 years ago? I would argue in a lot of ways he's better, and in some ways, like, not projecting to potentially shoot the 3. You know, that maybe is what the big differentiator is, but he's a big center. He plays good defense. He's a great rebounder. You know, he seems to have above average ability to put the ball on the floor. Like, I don't understand not at least going for that. You know, it's not even just about like giving the fan base something to look at and say, look, we have something to hang our hat on today. It's like, I feel like it says a little something. I don't know. There's 2 ways you could interpret this, but one way is that it says, oh, we trust our scouting so much that Walt Perrin said, you know, none of these guys are big difference makers now that all the ones that we wanted are off the board. But the other way to look at it is like that potentially Leon Rose and maybe Brock Aller were like, no, we'd rather assets than these guys that you spent time scouting, and I don't care about this scouting report where you say that Jalen Duren could be, Bam Adebayo or whatever. I think that getting this extra Milwaukee first round pick in 2025 is worth more than that. You know what I mean? And from my perspective, I just look at those picks and like, yes, if they had just traded back and gotten traded back 2 spots, gotten 2 extra, albeit heavily protected first round picks for their trouble, that's more than worth it. Like, that's fine. That's like, round of applause level move right there. Like that reminds me more of the sort of value that they were getting like in the first year when it was like they traded, was it 27 and 38 for picks or for pick 23, and then turned that into 25 and 33 and moved up 8 total spots. Like, that would have been that sort of move where I'm like, yes, this is great. Like, this is great asset management. You're still going to get the guy you want. You only move back 2 spots, whatever. But then to get that Milwaukee pick, like, I understand that's the closest thing to an unprotected pick that they just added. But I don't know how many teams you could go to around the league and be like, hey, what if 30-year-old Giannis somehow, is on a team that is in the cellar and this ends up as a 4 to 10 pick or something in 2025. I just don't see anyone in the league that's going to be like, oh yeah, I could definitely see a precipitous drop off for Giannis in the next 3 years and the Bucks just being a total tire fire. Like, that's definitely worth banking on and trading like my superstar for or whatever. I just don't see it. And, that's the part that annoys me is like, this team has done a good job of scouting and drafting. And so I have no doubt that whoever they would have taken at pick 13, had they stayed there, would have at least been like a quality rotation piece in the NBA. And is that not more valuable than banking on Milwaukee's downfall in 2 years? I don't know. Like, even just from a trade asset perspective, I question it a bit. So, I'm going to try to keep an open mind with it, like I do with everything that the Knicks do. And to your point earlier, like, the last couple drafts, we've left it at the best, like, perplexed a little bit. I think in the IQ one, like, I had read, like, Stacey Patton, our buddy, had written a really good piece about Emmanuel Quickley prior to that draft. So I was already kind of talking myself into it. And then obviously that worked out great. Obi, neither of us were sold on. We were actually kind of like annoyed at that pick, and he's worked out pretty well to this point. Grimes, we were kind of like, who? Like, we looked up so many other guys in this range and they take the one we didn't do one show on. And, we just kind of left scratching our heads, and ultimately he worked out good too. Deuce, we were pretty happy with in the moment. Sims, we were like, I don't know, he bounces and he's at pick 58, so who cares? Like, this one is just, there's no fruits of the labor for this one. So we won't have anything to judge this on in a few weeks by Summer League. We won't have anything to judge this deal on this whole season, short of them trading all this stuff for like a Donovan Mitchell. But if ultimately all that these picks end up being used for is to say, like, attach one of these to like Evan Fournier to dump him somewhere so that they can go sign Jalen Brunson, like, really, how great is this front office at asset management if that's ultimately where things end up? I don't know. And we'll have to see. But it's still an open-ended question right now. I just wish that we had more of an answer than just like, oh, here's Trevor Keels after last night, who's another guy that I admittedly know not nearly enough about, other than watching Duke games to have seen like Paolo and AJ Griffin and Mark Williams this year. And knowing that Keels was just sort of like a glue guy for them. So I guess we'll see. Here's hoping Keels is good, I guess. But it was all in all for me an extremely underwhelming night when there was legit rumblings about potentially moving up and getting a guy that looked like he could have been a franchise alterer in Jaden Ivey, and then not even getting the other guy that the Pistons wound up now getting to pair with Jaden Ivey along with Cade Cunningham, and watching them build a fun, exciting young team while the Knicks are stuck with, like, I mean, they're not stuck. Like, they have a good young core themselves, but they said, no, you know what? We don't want to add any young players to this, and we're going to figure this out some other way. Hopefully the answer that they have is good, because otherwise this is going to look very quickly like a like a night that wasn't worth it. I don't think if some of these things don't pay dividends pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think my only, maybe not even a positive thought, but what's tough about all this is it's human nature to want your team to make a pick, right? It's human nature for a front office to want to make a pick. Like you like look at what we've been doing the last 2 months. We spent hours and hours talking to people about prospect. And the thing is, you're going to miss out on 95% of those guys, but you're going to get someone and you're like, oh, we talked to a Jake Rosen about this, or Mark Schindler about this guy, or PD Webb about this guy, and he said this, and this, and you get to be excited, and you get to go home the next day with that new toy from the toy store as an adult, and it's the best feeling in the world, and it's really exciting. And every fan feels a little bit robbed of that. So I think given some time, like given some space, maybe we'll see what the grand plan here is for the Knicks, and it'll look really, really good. But they don't have the benefit of the doubt anymore. Like if we go into the season and nothing has been done with these picks, or there isn't anything on the horizon to be done with these picks, and especially obviously if they somehow still miss out on Jalen Brunson, and it's this weird conundrum where I'm like, I don't even know if I want them to pay Jalen Brunson the number they're probably gonna have to pay him to get him away from Dallas, but that's the situation where we're in, where you're sort of make or break on that guy. So there has to be something bigger in the works. If not, to your point and my point, this was a failed night for the New York Knicks. And it's not just one of those situations where on paper you're like, oh, that sucks that I didn't get to celebrate. You're really in a tough position as a franchise. And this is a point that our guy Schwinn made on Twitter, and I agreed with. He thought that this was an indicator that they're going to invest in the youth this year, and they want to focus on the 7 or 8 guys on the roster that are 25 or under. And if that's the case, then so be it. Obviously, taking someone at 13 wouldn't have precluded that. And they could have found another way to get off Kemba, or just stretched him if it had come down to that, and they could certainly afford to have just done that. But I'm hoping that things trend in that direction. We will see throughout free agency. We will wrap up this podcast for now, but a whole lot more to talk about. I'm sure maybe we'll have our guy JJ back on from Locked On Blue Devils to talk about Trevor Keels a little bit more. We will go in depth on all potential free agents, all potential trades, but that'll be for the future. Until next time, he's Alex. I'm Gavin. We'll talk to you soon. Peace out.